I will talk about communication-induced belief understanding. This is a joint work with Kovacs in Central European University. So there might be at least two forms of belief acquisition, one at least. One will be the ones that we acquired through first-hand experiences, the one that we had direct perception, so that, for instance, you hide a toy to a location, you believe that it's in that location. And then the second one will be the ones that we acquired through second-hand experiences, the one that are communicated to us, the one that we are told. So human beings are surrounded by beliefs in their community, and most of these beliefs are communicated solely. So for instance, a religious one, like the sun has a divine power, might be a religious. And an immoral one, the golden rule, treat people the way you want to be treated, or an normative one. These are the ones that, for instance, any forms of more complex form of beliefs that kind of shape our social identity, political identity. These are the beliefs that we acquire through communication, and we don't have direct perception to these. Somebody told us, and we start to believe. So if you make such a distinction, at least between the two forms of belief acquisition, then one might ask, how do we understand others' beliefs based on direct and indirect evidences? Indirect, I mean the language or communication. And are belief attribution based on direct versus indirect evidence qualitatively different? The way that we react to these beliefs, could they differ from one another? So, and to answer this question, one might adopt a developmental perspective and ask, do infants represent others' beliefs in a communicative context in which beliefs is induced, false belief especially induced via communication. So infants seem to track others' beliefs induced via visual cues. So what happens in this classical infant task is that one agent hides a toy, the naive believer hides a toy to one location and then goes out and then change of location happens. So this naive believer has a direct perception about the visual information about the initial location of the object. So what we are looking for is slightly different. So to our knowledge, there is no study in the literature that investigate communicatively induced belief attribution, where in the scenario, this agent should be told about the initial location of the object, so no direct perception should be there. This is especially important when we think about the previous examples on beliefs that we acquire via communication. They are solely communicated to us. No direct perception is possible. So which form of belief induction are infants relying more on is a related question. So visually induced beliefs might be strongly encoded, such that considering social learning, most of them happen in infancy through visual perspective, taking and joint attention. Maybe the way that they react to these beliefs induced via communication might be stronger than the communicated ones, or the communicated ones are stronger. We know that from the literature, even from infancy, the children basically trust the communicated information compared to the visual one, which is just, they just saw. So basically they trust the communicated one over these visual ones, or possibly the equal strength. So there is no study in the literature that investigate communicative induced belief attribution, but there are studies where communication plays a role. So infants could update their representations about others' beliefs. What I mean is that there are two classical looking time studies where agents hide a toy to one location. Here the initial location object is visually informed. So basically the agent has a direct perception about the initial location. She herself hides the toy and then goes out, and then change of location happens. And then this agent comes back and she's informed about the current location, which means that the belief is updated. So an infants change their belief about this agent's belief and think that right now this agent's belief is updated and will go to the current location of the object. So they build such expectation, even there are more recent studies on these. So, but we are looking for something different, especially also in this study. The belief is induced via direct perception, so we will be looking for something like somebody else should told to this belief to the agent from the initial location. So how to find out this? And we will be measuring infants' tendency to correct false beliefs. So infants use communicative signals to inform others based on this Kunis and Liskowski 2012 study. We are relying on that, but let's more closely look at this 2012 study. Basically, an agent has direct perception about the initial location, which means that she hides a toy in the right cup. It was container, I guess, and then with the blue shirt, and then goes out. This sneaky guy is an experimenter with the green shirt, comes back and they change the location, classic false belief, change of location task, and then she goes back, and then this naive believer comes and waits in these two spots with the black dot for a spontaneous response without indicating the aim of her, which is finding the toy. And what they found is that basically with the red shirt infant points to the current location of the object, Here, the false belief trials correspond to the mistaken action ones, and they point more in the false belief trials, which means that they point and inform the adult about the current location of the object. So we will be relying on that, but slightly change it, because in that study, still the initial location is not communicated, but visually induced. So what we are doing here is that, oops, yep, infant sits at the middle, agent sits next to the infant, and then across them there's this experimenter as a sneaky guy. So basically the first initial location is hidden through this occluder. So both the infant and then agent couldn't see where the toy is. So then this belief is communicated through the experimenter. The experimenter pointed and say that the toy is here, the toy is there. So, and then change of location happens depending on the given condition. In the false belief trial, this naive believer, the agent wasn't there. So, and then while this sneaky guy goes behind the curtain, this naive believer comes and they say bye, and then a sneaky guy goes behind the curtain, and then in these two spots, as in the case of the 2012 study, spontaneous response time began. So let's watch one trial, false belief trial, to make it concrete.
Hier für dich. Wow.
She is the agent,
Mal.
naive believer.
Schau, ich verstecke es. Ich verstecke es.
Oh.
She attempted but couldn't see it.
Ich kann nicht sehen, wo es ist. Wo könnte es sein?
Das Spielzeug
Here is
ist
the
da.
communicated information.
Aha, okay. Oh, ich muss jetzt raus. Aber ich komme gleich wieder und dann machen wir weiter.
Schau. Schau. Ich gebe das hier hin. Hier.
She pointed the current location of the object.
Tschüss, Dori.
Tschüss.
And then spontaneous response time begins.
Sollen wir weiterspielen? Ja.
Pointing went to the early location first.
Okay, weiter geht's. Ja.
And then to the current location. And then play happily after. So when we look at the findings, what we see is that in the true belief condition, there's a marginal difference such that they pointed more in the true belief. In the continuous measure with mean number of pointing, and in the categorical measure, there was no difference. So percentage of infants who pointed at least once. And we couldn't replicate the 2012 study, and there are multiple reasons why we couldn't do that. First is that this was just a conceptual replication. Second is that we used the interesting toys, which might make a difference, especially considering that in the false belief trial, it's not that infants did not point, they point, but they just pointed in the true belief more, probably which means that they just also wanted to get the toy, which wasn't the case in 2012 study. The agent was only the one in need with slightly boring objects. So, and there's also results that are consistent with the original study in Powell and colleagues 2018. So, and when we look at the findings to the earlier CAP, so we found a difference across the conditions such that in the false belief trials, they pointed more to the earlier CAP compared to the true belief one. So we thought that this is an allocentric effect, which means that infants pointing are aligning with the, these agents, naive believers, false belief. So, and it is in both measure, categorical and continuous. So we found that it's surprising and unexpected, and we wanted to replicate it with the exact replication. We couldn't replicate it in the continuous, but in the categorical measure. And so the answering the first question is that whether infants understand and kind of influenced by the beliefs induced via communication. Yes, that might be true, and indirectly based on this allocentric bias, but we don't know the answer to the second question, which means that whether the way that the belief is induced kind of change the infant's reaction, so that we have the same task with a visual version of it, where the belief is induced through visual information. So what we did is basically we didn't use the occluder. Both the agent and infant could see the initial location of the object. We found even a stronger effect slightly, and they pointed again in the earlier condition, earlier location more in the false belief compared to the true belief. So answering to this second question, which form of belief in induction are infants relying more on? Probably the visual one. So the difference between the experiment 1 and 3 is the visual version, is marginally different, but considering this is a between subject analysis, more sample might be needed. So one critical question is, though, do infants believe that the object is in the early location in the false belief condition? So this might be that whether they just, this does mean that they just forgot where the toy is, the current location of it. So according to strong allocentric bias proposal, that might be the case maybe. So the infants might only represent others' beliefs, the initial absence of self-representation. So for that one, what we did is basically, as in the case of original 2012 study, what happens is that if the infant could not point the current location of the object in the false belief condition, agent sits down, look at the initial location and surprise and say, to ask two direct questions. How is it possible? And do you know where the toy is? After these questions combined with the spontaneous face responses, what we see is that the percentage of infants who pointed to the current location of the object at least once increased, and most of these kids actually, at least in one of these trials, pointed to the current location of the object. So it's not likely that they forgot where the toy is. But this is an age, as we saw from the previous talks, that emergence of self-awareness. So maybe in some of these kids that pointed to the early location of the object in a given trial, they just do not remember and have the strong allocentric bias in that specific trial. And it's not the case that in most of these kids, they pointed to both location, as we just saw in the video. Most of the time, they just pointed to the early one, and that was all. So maybe in that specific trial, they're having this strong allocentrism, considering that this is 18 months old. Or some of these kids just don't know the current location of the object and not having this self-awareness, and we couldn't have a mirror recognition task. We don't know whether these 18 months olds, how many of them are having self-awareness. Maybe that is the case. So one idea that we came up with, and we are right now started data collection for that, after the first spontaneous pointing, we will ask a direct question. We slightly changed the question in the direct phase. So they point to one location, spontaneous phase starts, they point to one location, and then let's say the earlier one, and then agent asks, yes, let's find the toy. Where is the toy? If no answer, we continue with, do you know where the toy is? So if no pointing, we expect that infants will shift their answers from earlier to the current location, which means that they remember the current location after this prompt with a direct question. So to conclude, the way we acquire others' beliefs in our community might depend on theory of mind abilities that develop very early on in infancy. So all these forms of complex beliefs that we are exposed in our daily life, like religious ones, moral ones, normative ones, these are solely taught to us. So these are based on communication. And what we see is a very simple form of it might be there in infancy through these 3 experiments that we observed, indirectly based on this allocentric effect. And thank you for your listening. Many thanks to Dori with data collection, especially Cognitive Development Center and kids and their families.
We have some time for questions. Maybe while people are still gathering their thoughts, I'll start with a question then. So I was wondering whether your findings might also be compatible not with an allocentric interpretation of them, but could also be a different kind of communication, right? So one thing that struck me when I saw the videos, didn't know those before, that the agent is touching that one and being very communicative. So it could be something like, isn't that the one you touched before? Or, I mean, all kind of different things I could imagine this pointing to mean, given especially that it seems like there was no specific question, right? If I understood correctly. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, the one thing is that, so they kind of shared experience with the previous location. So that was the one thing that we need to think. But the only thing that I can say at the moment, so that happens across the conditions in a way that in the false belief condition they are having this finding. Also having from the very first trial, maybe that they're not exactly influenced by the agent's behavior, but they just kind of influenced by the belief itself, or some form of mentalistic approach might be supported, but it is not sure. Yes, especially as long as we have this behavior of touching to the earlier one. Yeah, I need to think more about that. Thank you.
So thank you for a very nice talk. I have a question about this hierarchy, postulated hierarchy that you, this hierarchy that you postulate between communicatively induced beliefs and perceptually induced beliefs. First, as a side comment, from your video, it dawned upon me that the visually induced belief is also a case of communication, where the toy's location is shown very communicatively to the child, right? So you have both perception and communication in this case. I wanted to know whether you think this contributes to the effect you observe. And then a broader question is whether you think that this hierarchy, postulated hierarchy, would be the same for other types of information, not necessarily about the location of an object, but let's say, for example, information about kinds or, other types of information, where you might assume that communication might start trumping perceptual information.
So for the first question, thank you. For the first question, I guess we should have another condition where this, in the visual version, even there should be no communication. I guess 2022 has something similar to that. And we should have something like in the documented science article. So we should have a version of it that is not communicative, that the initial location is kind of induced. We should have it, and I expect to have the same finding, but we should have it. And then the second question is whether it is kind of domain general development such that this communicatively induced is applied to other ones. I think it should apply, but I think more experiments in different domains, like identity or whatever you say, I don't exactly remember it, but we should need in other domains to say that it's, they understand this based on communication. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
In your video, the baby first pointed to one location, then did an interesting gesture like this as an absent.
Like no idea?
Like it's not
Yes,
there,
yes,
and then
it's a good
pointed to
catch.
the other one. Is that just this video's artifact, or was that common?
I can't say it is common, but I promise that I see it at least more than 2 or 3 times. So that is something is happening. So they kind of puzzled a little bit sometimes, especially. And especially we see it in the direct question phase, that when they couldn't find it, it's just the response, why do you asking to me? You hide it. So that's kind of question that we see, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. I was wondering if this entire effect, maybe I lost track somewhere, so maybe it's
Sorry.
No, it's me who lost track. So if this effect is more about a reference of a common experience or a common ground than an outer-centric, and I was wondering if it would worth a try to have a second object. I don't know, I haven't thought it fully over how much cognitive load this would be and how much that would interact with the task, but to pit against a preference for a particular object of an experimenter to the last seen location which should be encoded. So, because there are these 2 tracks of possible explanations that it's an outer-centric bias because that's what they saw together, where that object is. But if there's a second object for which there's a preference, the pointing may direct at the preferred object when the agent asks, do you want to play with me? So I wonder, what do you think about this?
So I got it in a way that, so maybe if it is this common ground, not the autocentric bias kind of question. So basically, what I was thinking first, that maybe this is just the initial reference about the original place. It might be a pointing so that remember that time that we agreed upon that it's in that location, but it's not there anymore. So that might be kind of first kind of initiating this common ground and then continue. But the problem is that it didn't happen in a way that we thought it's autocentric, because it's not a communicative in a way that, so because they are prosocial, they know the current place, so and they should help, they're supposed to help. So what I expect is that if it's a common ground thing, so they first point to the earlier one and then go to the current one to say that, oh, we start from here, but it's right now there. But that's also that these are 18-month-olds, maybe their communicative skills are not strong enough. But that I answered that your question, I'm not sure. But
Yeah, I just wanted to specify it a bit more, that the pointing at the empty location may not be about the location, but I'm referring to the thing that you think is there. So it's not about the location, but if it's a common ground, it's, you know, the thing that we agreed that we are going to play together, and you think it's there. So I'm thinking with your experience now, but they had, I mean, in this particular video that you showed, it wasn't a problem for the kid to point out the correct location.
it wasn't the case all the time, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would expect kind of insisting that. So if it's a common ground, so they should also point to current location because it's pro-social beings. But that is perfectly an explanation, and I need to think more, I guess, about this to be sure what it is. This earlier pointing. Thank you.
Okay, let's thank Bartug one more time.